What happens when a cage made of gold finally breaks for Nora Sterling, the beautiful wife of billionaire tech mogul Richard Sterling. That cage was a Manhattan penthouse with breathtaking views and suffocating expectations. At a dinner party filled with New York's elite, Richard didn't just dislike his wife's cooking. He publicly crucified it, calling her heartfelt family recipe peasant food fit for a soup kitchen. The laughter of his powerful guests echoed louder than any insult. But they didn't know they weren't just mocking a dish, they were igniting a revolution. This is the story of how one woman turned the deepest humiliation into the highest honor, proving that revenge is a dish best served with a Michelin Star. The air in the Sterling's penthouse, a glass-walled behemoth perched atop one of Manhattan's most exclusive skyscrapers, was thick with the scent of money and power. It was the kind of air that cost millions to breathe, filtered and climate-controlled a sterile environment for the city's apex predators. Tonight, Richard Sterling, CEO of the tech private equity firm Ethelred Capital, was holding court. His guests were a curated collection of human capital Senator Davies, whose legislative pen could rewrite markets. Victoria Carrington, a socialite whose whisper could make or break a reputation, and a dozen other figures plucked from the glittering pages of Forbes and Vanity Fair. And then there was Nora. To the world, Nora Sterling was the perfect accessory to her husband's life. With her classical beauty, quiet grace, and a wardrobe sponsored by Richard's black card, she was the elegant, smiling fixture at his side. But tonight, she felt a tremor of rebellion. For weeks, she had been planning this dinner. Not with the caterers Richard preferred faceless artisans who produced technically perfect but soulless food, but with her own two hands. In the gleaming, state-of-the-art kitchen that was mostly for show, she was bringing a piece of her soul to life. It was her nonna's cioppino, a rustic, robust Italian-American fisherman's stew. It was the smell of her childhood, of a small, love-filled kitchen in San Francisco, a world away from this sterile palace in the sky. The rich aroma of tomato broth, saffron garlic, and the sea filled the space a warm human scent that felt like an invader in the cold, minimalist apartment. She had poured everything into it, sourcing the freshest clams and mussels from a specialty market in the Bronx, finding the perfect fennel simmering the broth for hours until it reached the complex, layered perfection she remembered. It was more than a soup. It was a story in a bowl. Her story. As she directed the staff to serve the deep earthenware bowls, a nervous energy fluttered in her chest. This was the first time she had ever insisted on cooking for one of Richard's important events. He had been dismissive, of course. "Nora, darling, that's what we have people for. Don't trouble yourself." But she had persisted, framing it as a charming, personal touch. The bowls were placed before the guests. The vibrant red of the broth, dotted with bright green parsley and studded with shells, was a stark contrast to the stark white porcelain. A few guests murmured appreciative comments, intrigued by the bold, fragrant dish. Richard, seated at the head of the long marble table, picked up his spoon. He swirled it in the bowl, his lip curling ever so slightly. He took a small, deliberate sip. The table fell silent, watching him. He placed the spoon down with a soft, metallic click that echoed in the cavernous room. "Well," he began, a smirk playing on his lips. He turned not to Nora, but to his audience. "My wife, Nora, has decided to treat us all to an authentic taste of her origins tonight." A few nervous titters went around the table. Nora's heart began to pound, a painful, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She knew that tone. It was the one he used right before a kill. "This is a cioppino," he announced, pronouncing the word with exaggerated mocking flair. "It's a charming little dish, I'm told. Something fishermen would throw together with the day's leftover catch. Very resourceful." He let the insult hang in the air. Senator Davies chuckled uncomfortably. Victoria Carrington raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her expression a mask of polite disdain. "Darling," Richard said finally, looking down the table at Nora, his voice dripping with condescension. "I appreciate the effort. Truly. But perhaps this sort of thing is better suited for a charity soup kitchen than for our guests. We can't have Senator Davies thinking Ethelred Capital is in financial trouble, can we?" The table erupted in laughter. It wasn't kind laughter. It was the sharp, cruel laughter of a pack that had found a moment of weakness to exploit. They were laughing with Richard at Nora. Each burst of sound was a physical blow. Her face burned with a shame so hot it felt like it could melt glass. She looked around the table at the faces of the people who smiled at her at galas, who complimented her dress, who called her lovely. And in their eyes, she saw nothing but her husband's reflection, cold, dismissive, amused. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. Her personal story, her cherished memory of her grandmother, had been served up for public ridicule. It wasn't just about a soup. It was about her worth. He had taken the most authentic part of her and declared it worthless, embarrassing peasant food. Only one person wasn't laughing. At the far end of the table sat Jane Croft, the notoriously sharp-tongued food critic for the New York Chronicle. He was a man whose reviews could close restaurants. He hadn't laughed. He was looking into his bowl with an intense, analytical expression. He took another spoonful, then another, his brow furrowed in concentration. He swirled the broth, sniffed it, and tasted it again, ignoring the chatter around him. For a fleeting moment, his eyes met Nora's from across the table. There was no pity in his gaze. There was something else. Curiosity. But Nora barely registered it. The roar in her ears was too loud. The sting of humiliation was too sharp. The evening dragged on an excruciating performance where she had to smile, nod, and pretend she wasn't shattered. When the last guest finally departed, leaving trails of expensive perfume and hollow goodbyes, the silence that descended on the penthouse was more damning than the laughter had been. The cage had never felt smaller. The view of the sparkling city lights outside seemed to mock her. She was a prisoner in the sky, and her warden had just reminded her that the bars, no matter how gilded, were still bars. The click of the heavy front door sealing them in was the starting pistol for a race Nora no longer wanted to run. Richard loosened his tie, a triumphant glint in his eyes. He poured himself a glass of Macallan 25, the amber liquid sloshing against the crystal. "Well, that was a close one," he said, turning to her with an air of magnanimous forgiveness. "Don't worry, darling. I think I smoothed it over." Nora stood motionless, her hands clenched at her sides. The beautiful dress she wore felt like a costume. "Smoothed it over," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Yes, the whole rustic dinner theatre act. It was a misstep, but a minor one. People will forget." He took a sip of his scotch. "Let's just agree from now on, you leave the entertaining to the professionals. Your talents lie elsewhere." He gestured vaguely at her, encompassing her beauty, her poise, her role as the silent, smiling wife. A dam inside Nora that had been cracking for years finally broke. "My talents," she asked, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You mean my talent for being quiet, for looking pretty, for not having any opinions that might inconvenience your business deals? Richard sighed, the picture of a patient man dealing with an emotional wife. Nora, don't be dramatic. You have a wonderful life, a life any woman would kill for. I provide you with everything. Everything except respect. She shot back, her voice gaining strength. You didn't just insult my cooking, Richard. You stood up in front of all those people, our guests, and you belittled me. You took something that was personal, something that meant something to me, and you used it as a punchline to make yourself feel powerful. Oh, for God's sake, it was a joke, a little ribbing, he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. You need to develop a thicker skin. This is the big leagues. Everything is about perception, and the perception tonight was that my wife was serving. Well, it doesn't matter. The point is, it made us look unsophisticated. Us. Nora's voice was ice. There is no us in that sentence, Richard. There is only you and your perception. I am just one of your assets, like this apartment, or your coal, or your watch. Something to be polished and displayed and hidden away when it doesn't suit the brand. The argument raged a storm contained within the glass walls of the penthouse. But for the first time, Nora wasn't fighting to be understood. She was fighting to confirm what she already knew. Richard didn't see her. He never had. His apology, when it finally came, was the final nail in the coffin. All right. Look, I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt, he said, his tone laced with impatience. It was a poor choice of words. Happy now, can we please move past this? I have a $70 million merger with Thorn Industries to worry about tomorrow. I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt. Not I'm sorry I hurt you. The distinction was everything. He wasn't sorry for his actions, only for her reaction. That night, Nora didn't sleep in their cavernous bedroom, with its panoramic views of a city that suddenly felt alien. She went to the guest room, a space as impersonal as a hotel suite. But before she lay down, she walked back into the silent, gleaming kitchen. The leftover cioppino sat on the counter cold and abandoned. She looked at it, and the shame from earlier began to morph into something else. It was a slow, hot burn in the pit of her stomach. It was anger. It was resolve. He had called her food peasant food. He had called her story embarrassing. He thought he had the power to define her worth. A cold, clear thought cut through her misery. You are wrong. She went to her study, a room Richard had decorated as a lady's office, filled with beautiful stationery she never used and leather-bound classics she'd already read. In the back of a drawer beneath old photo albums was a worn leather-bound journal. It was her nonna's recipe book. The pages were soft and stained with olive oil and flour, the script a beautiful fading cursive. She ran her fingers over the familiar handwriting. This book was a legacy of love, patience, and flavor. It was everything her marriage was not. It was real. As the first light of dawn broke over the East River, casting long shadows across the city, Nora made a decision. Leaving Richard now would be a quiet surrender. He would paint her as emotional, unstable, and ungrateful. He would win. No, she wouldn't leave. Not yet. She would fight him on a battlefield of her own choosing. She would take the very thing he had mocked her passion for food, and she would forge it into a weapon. She would prove not just to him and his sycophantic friends, but to herself that she was more than an accessory. She wasn't peasant class. She was world class. Flipping through the journal, she found the page for the cioppino. In the margin, her grandmother had written in Italian, Il cibo è la voce del cuore. Food is the voice of the heart. Her heart had been silenced for too long. Now it was going to learn to scream. Her war wouldn't be fought with lawyers and publicists. It would be fought with fire and knives and the relentless, punishing pursuit of perfection. He thought he'd put her in her place. He had no idea he'd just shown her the way out. Nora knew that a billionaire's wife couldn't simply enroll in culinary school without raising alarms. Richard monitored their finances with an eagle eye, and any large, unexplained tuition fee would trigger an immediate inquiry. Her rebellion had to be a ghost moving through the city unseen. Her first move was to create the perfect alibi. Over a tense, cool breakfast, she announced her new project. "Richard, I've been thinking," she began. Her voice carefully modulated to sound earnest and placid. "Victoria Carrington was telling me about a new fundraising initiative for the New York Arts Foundation. It involves curating and restoring old photographic archives. It's a lot of manual work, very hands-on, but for a good cause." Richard, scrolling through market reports on his tablet, barely looked up. "Art. Charity. Good. It'll look good in the society pages. Just have my assistant handle the donation." "It's more than a donation, Richard. I want to be involved. Personally," she pressed. "It means I'll be spending a few days a week downtown, at their workshop." "Fine, fine," he said, waving her off. "Whatever keeps you busy." The workshop was her cover, with a plausible reason to be away for hours at a time, wearing casual clothes and returning smelling of chemicals, which could easily be mimicked. Her secret life could begin. Through weeks of discreet late-night research, Nora found him. He wasn't on television. He didn't have a line of branded cookware. His name was whispered in reverence by old guard chefs and dismissed by the new wave of molecular gastronomists. Chef Antoine Dubois, a culinary legend from Lyon who had earned 2 Michelin Stars for his New York restaurant, Le Chêne, in the 90s, only to lose them both a decade later. The official story was a decline in standards. The rumor was that he had punched a Michelin inspector who'd suggested he add a foam to his classic bœuf bourguignon. He was brilliant volatile, and most importantly, he had vanished from the fine dining scene, now running a small invitation-only masterclass from the basement of a nondescript brownstone in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. Getting an invitation was the first test. She couldn't use the Sterling name. She sent a simple handwritten letter under her maiden name, Nora Vance, expressing a deep technical appreciation for his classic sauces and mentioning her desire to understand the soul of French cuisine, not its modern theatrics. She included a certified check for the exorbitant tuition drawn from a secret bank account she'd maintained for years, funded by a small inheritance from her grandmother. 2 weeks later, a simple typewritten card arrived: Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, 6 a.m. Be prepared. Her first day felt like descending into another world. She took the subway to Brooklyn, a journey she hadn't made alone in a decade. The air in Antoine's basement kitchen was a humid, fragrant mix of simmering stock yeast and bleach. It was the complete opposite of her kitchen, at home, cramped, brutally functional, with scarred butcher blocks and hanging copper pots that bore the dents of years of furious work. Chef Antoine Dubois was a compact, fierce man in his late 60s, with a wild mane of white hair, hands as gnarled as ancient roots, and eyes that missed nothing. He stood before his 4 students, 2 aspiring line cooks, and a disillusioned hedge funder with his arms crossed. "You are not here to find your passion," he growled, his French accent thick and gravelly. Passion is for painters and poets. Cooking is a craft. It is pain. It is discipline. It is the knife, the flame, and the clock. They are your gods. Disrespect them, and you will be cast out. He looked directly at Nora. Her manicured nails and expensive-looking, though deliberately simple clothes did not escape his notice. You, Vance, you write a nice letter. Let's see if your hands can keep up with your words. Your first lesson, dicing onions. You have 50 pounds. I want a perfect 0.mm brunoise. No tears. Tears are salt water. They will ruin the cutting board. Cry on your own time. For the next 5 hours, Nora chopped. Her back screamed. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let a single tear fall. Her first attempts were clumsy, uneven. Antoine would sweep them into the trash with a dismissive grunt. Garbage. Again. Her hands, accustomed to silk and charity galas, were quickly covered in blisters and nicks. By the end of the day, they were raw, cramping, and stained with the sharp scent of onion. The hedge funder had quit by noon. Day after day, it was the same brutal, humbling education. She learned how to butcher a whole lamb, breaking it down into its primal cuts with precision and respect. She learned the searing heat of the sauté station, the patient art of a 36-hour demi-glace, the delicate science of baking. Antoine was a merciless teacher. He never praised her. The closest she got to approval was a quiet, passable. Do it again, but faster. He was breaking her down, stripping away the soft, privileged shell of Nora Sterling and reforging the determined core of Nora Vance. He didn't care about her money or her name. In his kitchen, she was defined only by the quality of her work. One grueling afternoon, as she was struggling to perfect a hollandaise sauce, her third attempt had just split. Antoine came up behind her. "You are hesitating," he said, his voice low. "You fear the heat. You are trying to control the sauce, but you must listen to it. Feel the emulsion. Be bolder. Stop thinking like a lady and start cooking like a chef." Something in his words. "Stop thinking like a lady" resonated with Richard's condescension. A flash of anger, hot and clean, surged through her. She turned up the heat, whisking with a new furious energy, her movements sure and confident. The sauce came together thick, glossy, and perfect. She held the pan out for his inspection, her chest heaving. Antoine dipped a spoon and tasted it, and looked at her. For the first time, there was a flicker of something other than disdain in his eyes. "So," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips, "there is a fire in there after all. Good. Fire is something I can work with." It was the first piece of her blade being forged in the heat. She would leave the basement kitchen, exhausted, her body aching, and take the subway back to Manhattan. She would slip back into the penthouse shower, away the smell of the kitchen, and put on her costume as Mrs. Sterling, ready to play her part over a catered dinner with Richard, who remained blissfully unaware that the woman across the table from him was no longer just his wife. She was becoming a chef. 6 months under Antoine's relentless tutelage had transformed Nora. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused and cross-hatched, with small silvery scars from burns and knife slips, a map of her secret education. Her palate, once accustomed to the muted flavors of catered fine dining, was now sharp and discerning, able to detect the slightest imbalance in a dish. She moved with a new economy of motion, a chef's grace born of 1,000 repetitive tasks. But practice without performance was meaningless. She needed a stage, however small. The idea for a pop-up came from a conversation overheard on the subway. 2 young foodies were buzzing about an anonymous chef who was doing reservation-only dinners in a Brooklyn warehouse. It was guerrilla dining, exclusive, mysterious, and utterly merit-based. You couldn't get in because of who you were, only because you knew someone who had tasted the food. This was the perfect model. It offered anonymity and a low-risk entry into the scene. Using her arts foundation alibi, Nora found her venue, a friend from her pre-Richard life. A struggling artist named Chloe ran a small, gritty art gallery in the meatpacking district. The gallery was closed on Sundays and Mondays. For a generous donation to keep the gallery afloat, Chloe agreed to let Nora use the space on those nights. She needed a name, a culinary identity separate from both Sterling and Vance. She thought of her nonna's comment about food being the voice of the heart. A voice, a song, an aria. It sounded elegant, mysterious, and strong. Chef Aria was born. Her first pop-up was for an audience of 12 seats, filled by Chloe's artist friends and a few adventurous food bloggers Nora had contacted anonymously through encrypted email. The menu was small, only 4 courses, but each dish was a declaration of intent. It was a fusion of her nonna's soulful Italian cooking and Antoine's exacting French technique. The main course was a deconstructed, refined version of the very dish that had sparked her rebellion, the cioppino. But this was not her grandmother's rustic stew. This was Aria's creation. She had clarified the tomato saffron broth until it was a crystal-clear, intensely flavored consommé. The seafood, a single perfect scallop, a tender curl of squid, and 1 plump mussel was cooked sous vide to jewel-like perfection. It was served with a tiny, crisp saffron toile and a single drop of basil oil. It was the soul of the original, presented with the precision of a surgeon. The night was a blur of adrenaline. Working with 2 young cooks she'd hired from a culinary school, Nora commanded the small makeshift kitchen set up in the gallery's back room. For the first time, she was chef. The reaction was immediate and electric. The bloggers, accustomed to hype, were genuinely stunned. One whose site, Gotham Bites, had a cult following posted a breathless review the next morning. "Forget what you know about pop-ups," the review began. "Last night, in an unmarked gallery, a ghost chef who calls herself Aria conducted a symphony. The food is at once deeply comforting and shockingly innovative. The star was a cioppino consommé that was less a soup and more a religious experience. I don't know who Aria is, but she is the most exciting new voice in New York's culinary scene. Get a seat if you can beg, borrow, or steal one." The effect was instantaneous. Aria's anonymous email address was flooded with reservation requests. The next pop-up sold out in minutes. Then the one after that. Word of mouth spread like wildfire through the city's foodie underground. The mystery was a powerful marketing tool. Who was this Chef Aria? Was she a famous chef experimenting under a pseudonym? A disillusioned prodigy from a 3-star kitchen? Nora managed her double life with military precision. Her days were a carefully constructed charade. Lunches with Victoria Carrington, charity board meetings, fittings for gowns she would wear to galas on Richard's arm. Then she would change in the back of a cab, trading her Chanel flats for non-slip kitchen clogs, her silk blouse for a chef's jacket, and descend into the controlled chaos of her pop-up. Richard remained completely oblivious. He was consumed by the final hostile stages of his attempted takeover of Thorne Industries, a rival firm run by the shrewd and equally ruthless Marcus Thorne. He saw Nora's frequent absences and exhausted appearance as symptoms of her frivolous art project. One evening, as they were getting ready for yet another benefit dinner, Richard glanced up from his phone. Funny thing, he mused. Everyone at the office is buzzing about some new pop-up restaurant run by a chef named Arya. Can't get a table for love or money. Bill Ackman was saying it's the best meal he's had all year. Probably some hipster nonsense in Brooklyn. Nora's heart leaped into her throat. She focused on clasping her diamond necklace, her reflection in the mirror a mask of calm indifference. Oh, she said, her voice even. Sounds trendy. Maybe we should have them cater the Ethelred holiday party, he said thoughtlessly. If they're as good as people say, have your assistant look into it. The irony was so thick she could taste it. The man who had humiliated her for her cooking was now inadvertently offering her a job. I'll see what I can find out, she replied, a slow, secret smile touching her lips as she turned away from the mirror. The ghost was no longer just haunting a gallery. She was haunting the conversations of the very people who had once laughed at her. She was becoming a legend, and legends, she was beginning to realize, were far more powerful than trophy wives. Jane Croft, the formidable food critic of the New York Chronicle, considered himself immune to hype. He'd seen countless next big things flame out after a few months of buzz. But the whispers about Chef Arya were different. They were persistent and came from sources he trusted, jaded chefs, discerning sommeliers, and fellow critics who spoke of her food in hushed, reverent tones. The consistent praise for the food's technical brilliance, paired with an intangible soul, piqued his professional curiosity. It was the description of the cioppino consomme that finally hooked him. The dish sounded familiar. Leveraging his considerable influence, he secured a reservation under a false name for Arya's pop-up. He arrived alone, observing the scene with a hawk's eye, the diverse crowd, the electric yet intimate atmosphere of the gallery, the seamless service run by a small, focused team. The meal began. A celery root velouté with truffle and toasted hazelnut perfectly balanced. A handmade tagliatelle with a ragout of slow braised duck deeply flavorful, the pasta's texture flawless. Then the third course arrived, the cioppino consomme. Jane lifted the bowl, inhaling the faint, clean aroma of saffron and sea. He took a sip, and he remembered. The flavor profile was unmistakable. It was the same complex, layered base he had tasted a year ago, in that cold, ostentatious penthouse. The same distinct blend of fennel garlic and tomato that had been buried beneath a mountain of rustic ingredients. He remembered the look of utter devastation on Nora Sterling's face as her husband, that arrogant brute Richard, had torn her creation and her dignity to shreds. He remembered being the only one at the table who had recognized the dish's potential, the good bones, hidden within the home-style presentation. Now here it was again, not just refined, but resurrected, reborn. It was the work of someone who had not just studied technique, but who had an intimate, passionate connection to this specific dish. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a startling clarity. The secretive chef, the Arts Foundation alibi that society columns occasionally mentioned Mrs. Sterling was involved with downtown. The ghost was Nora Sterling. A lesser journalist might have seen the scoop of a lifetime. Billionaire's trophy wife's secret foodie life. The headline wrote itself. It would be a salacious, gossipy piece that would sell papers and generate clicks for days. But Jane Croft was more than a journalist. He was a true connoisseur, not just of food, but of the stories behind it. He saw not a scandal, but a tale of incredible defiance and artistic triumph. To expose her now would be to destroy the magic, to hand her story back to Richard Sterling, who would undoubtedly twist it to his own advantage. When the main course arrived, a perfectly seared piece of lamb with a lavender-infused joss. He knew what he had to do. After the meal, he didn't write his review. Instead, he used a discreet contact to get a message to Chef Aria's anonymous email address. "Your secret is safe," the message read, "but your talent is too big for this room. When you're ready to build a temple for your food, I can help you find the stones. JC." Nora read the email with a trembling hand. Jane Croft knew. The most powerful food critic in New York knew her identity. She felt a wave of panic followed by a strange sense of relief. He wasn't threatening to expose her. He was offering to help. She agreed to a clandestine meeting. They met on a bench in Madison Square Park, two figures hiding in plain sight. "Your Chopino gave you away," Jane said, his voice softer than his public persona suggested. "I tasted its potential at that dreadful dinner party. To see what you've turned it into. It's a testament not just to skill, but to immense character." He became her secret conspirator, her Gandalf in the world of high-stakes gastronomy. He connected her with a real estate agent who specialized in discreet restaurant locations, with artisanal suppliers who saved their best produce for chefs they respected, and with a lawyer who could help her set up a business entity without any ties to the sterling name. He was her guide through the treacherous landscape she was preparing to conquer. Meanwhile, another predator was circling. Marcus Thorne, the embattled CEO of Thorne Industries, was fighting off Richard Sterling's hostile takeover with everything he had. He employed a team of private investigators to dig up any dirt they could find on Richard. Anything to create a scandal that might spook his investors and drive down Ethelred Capital's stock price. The investigators initially found nothing on Richard, a man whose public image was meticulously scrubbed, so they turned their attention to his wife. They noted her frequent, lengthy trips to the meatpacking district. They staked out the Arts Foundation workshop, which was, of course, Chloe's gallery. They saw the crowds on Sunday and Monday nights. They saw the food being delivered. One of Thorne's investigators paid a busboy $200 for a photo of the chef in the kitchen. The photo was grainy, taken through a swinging door, but the profile was clear enough. It was Nora Sterling. Her hair tied back, her face intense with concentration, wearing a chef's jacket. Marcus Thorne looked at the photo, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. He didn't know the whole story. He didn't know about Aria or the pop-up's success. All he saw was the wife of the city's most image-obsessed billionaire secretly working in what looked like a back-alley kitchen. It was perfect. It was ammunition. He saved the photo, waiting for the most opportune moment to deploy his weapon and blow the Sterling Empire apart. The conspiracy of support around Nora was about to collide with a conspiracy of destruction. With Jane Croft's guidance, Nora found the perfect space. It was a former ironworks foundry in a quiet corner of Tribeca, a beautiful brick building with soaring ceilings and old-world character. It needed a gut renovation, a massive undertaking that would require a significant capital investment. The time had come to fully sever her financial dependence on Richard. Nora flew to San Francisco under the guise of visiting a sick aunt. There she met with the trustees of the account her grandmother had left her. It was a considerable sum, a nest egg Nonna had wisely firewalled from any future husband. Nora liquidated a substantial portion of it, transferring the funds to the new corporate entity her lawyer had created, Aria Gastronomy Group. She named the restaurant Nonna. It was a tribute, a declaration of her roots, and a secret nod to the woman who had given her the recipes and the means to reclaim her life. The next few months were a whirlwind of construction dust, menu development, and staff interviews. She hired the best of her pop-up team and poached a brilliant young sommelier Jane had recommended. Antoine Dubois, hearing of her venture, showed up on the construction site one day. He walked through the space, grunted in something that resembled approval, and declared, "You will need a proper pastry chef. I know a man. He is an artist, but a miserable human being." Perfect. He became her unofficial, terrifyingly blunt consultant. Nora was in her element, consumed and energized. She was so focused on the launch of Nonna that she barely noticed Richard's increasingly foul moods. The takeover of Thorne Industries had stalled. Marcus Thorne was proving more resilient than anticipated, and Richard's investors were getting nervous. The perfect moment for Marcus Thorne had arrived. Ethelred Capital was holding a critical all-hands board meeting. Richard was presenting a revised, more aggressive strategy to win over the last block of Thorne Industries shareholders. The mood was tense. The future of his empire hung in the balance. In the middle of Richard's presentation, his CFO's tablet chimed, then another director's. An email had just been sent to the entire board and key financial journalists. The sender was an anonymous whistleblower. The subject line, "The Sterling Image." The email contained a single image, the grainy photograph of Nora in her chef's jacket in the pop-up kitchen. Below it was a simple, devastating caption. "While Richard Sterling asks you to invest hundreds of millions based on his firm's pristine image, his wife is running a secret greasy spoon in a back alley. What else is he hiding? Sterling. Secrets." A wave of murmurs swept through the boardroom. Directors looked from their screens to Richard, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Richard, seeing their reactions, grabbed his CFO's tablet. His face went white. The blood drained from it, replaced by a dark, mottled red of pure fury. The slick, confident CEO evaporated, replaced by the raw, wounded ego of the man. He didn't see a business problem. He saw a personal betrayal. He saw the ultimate humiliation. The meeting fell apart. The vote was postponed. Investors were spooked. The narrative was no longer about a brilliant takeover. It was about the instability and secrets of the man at the helm. Marcus Thorne's missile had hit its target perfectly. Richard stormed out of the office. He didn't go to the restaurant. He went home to the penthouse. When Nora returned that evening, exhausted but thrilled after approving the final lighting design for Nonna, she found him waiting for her in the dark. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "At the foundation," she started to say, the lie dying on her lips. "Don't," he hissed, stepping into the light. He held up his phone, the picture of her displayed on the screen. "Don't you dare lie to me again!" The confrontation was explosive. It was not an argument between husband and wife. It was a reckoning. "A greasy spoon!" he roared, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "You've been sneaking around playing chef in some hovel, making me a laughingstock. After everything I've given you, I built an empire, and you're in a kitchen somewhere embarrassing me." Nora stood her ground. The fear she once felt replaced by a cold, hard calm. "You were embarrassed long before this, Richard. You were embarrassed by a pot of soup. You were embarrassed that I might have a single thing in my life that wasn't approved and stamped with your name." "I made you!" he bellowed, his face contorted. "Before me, you were nothing. I can unmake you just as easily. This little restaurant of yours, Nonna, I'll bury it. I'll use every lawyer, every regulator in this city to shut you down before you even open your doors. I will freeze your accounts. You'll be left with nothing." He took a step towards her, his presence menacing. "You are Mrs. Richard Sterling. You will remember that." Nora didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time he was the one who seemed small, trapped in his own gilded cage of ego and image. "No, Richard," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm not. Not anymore." She walked past him to her study. She returned and placed a thick manila envelope on the marble table between them. "These are from my lawyer at Rosen & Finch. They're divorce papers. I am not Mrs. Richard Sterling. My name is Nora Vance, and I am a chef." The look on his face, a cocktail of shock, rage, and disbelief, was more satisfying than any revenge she could have dreamed of. He had tried to put her in her place, a place he had defined, but she had built her own place, a place with its own name, its own soul, and he was not welcome there. The unmasking was complete. Not hers, but his. The world had just seen the petty, insecure man behind the billionaire's facade. The war Richard Sterling waged against his soon-to-be ex-wife was one of scorched earth litigation. He unleashed the full, terrifying power of his legal team from Ethelred Capital, a phalanx of razor-sharp lawyers accustomed to hostile takeovers, not divorce proceedings. Their strategy was clear: to bleed Nora dry, to bury Nonna in regulatory red tape, and to assassinate her character in the court of public opinion. Anonymous, vicious stories began appearing in the city's gossip columns, painting Nora as an unstable, fame-hungry dilettante. They whispered of erratic behavior and delusions of grandeur. Richard's camp framed her culinary ambition not as a passion, but as a petulant rebellion for not being allowed a higher credit card limit. Nora's lawyer, a formidable woman named Catherine Finch from the esteemed firm Rosen & Finch, laid out the grim reality in her office overlooking Bryant Park. "He's not trying to win Nora," Catherine said, gesturing to a mountain of filed motions on her desk. "He's trying to make you quit, to exhaust you emotionally and financially, until you crawl back and accept whatever pittance he offers. It's the same tactic he uses in business." But Richard had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He was accustomed to fighting corporations and shareholders' entities driven by profit and loss. He did not understand that Nora was now driven by something far more powerful, a reclaimed identity. Furthermore, the narrative he tried to sell simply didn't stick. Marcus Thorne's leak intended to harm Richard had inadvertently cast Nora as the underdog protagonist in a drama the entire city was watching. Social media rallied behind her with hashtags like #TeamMaria and Sterling Revenge. Every legal attack from Richard was seen not as a legitimate claim, but as bullying from a spurned billionaire. The more he tried to crush her, the more her legend grew. The anticipation for Nonna's opening reached a fever pitch. It was no longer just a restaurant opening, it was a public spectacle. It was David versus Goliath, if Goliath had a prenup, and David had a perfect recipe for agnolotti dal plin. Nonna opened its doors on a crisp October evening. The moment was surreal for Nora. She stood at the pass, the threshold between the controlled inferno of her kitchen and the calm elegance of the dining room, and watched her dream unfold. The room was breathtaking, a symphony of warm brick, reclaimed wood, and soft, intelligent lighting that made everyone look like they were in a painting. The air hummed with the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of excited conversation, and the kinetic energy of a flawless service team. She watched a woman at table 3 take her first bite of the cioppino consommé. The woman's eyes closed for a brief, reverent moment before she turned to her companion. Her expression one of pure, unadulterated delight. In that single silent reaction, Nora felt a wave of validation so profound it almost buckled her knees. This was real. She had built this. A week later, Jane Croft came to dine. He sat alone, unannounced, and Nora's entire kitchen staff felt a jolt of terror and excitement. They performed with the focus of surgeons. Jane ate his way through the tasting menu, his face an unreadable mask of professional concentration. He saw the story in every dish, the rebellious spirit in the bold flavors of the main course, the meticulous discipline in the perfect knife work of the vegetables, the deep love in the soulful, comforting dessert, a tribute to Nonna's tiramisu. His review, when it ran the following Sunday, was not just a critique, it was a coronation. "Go to Nonna not because of the story you've heard," he wrote in his powerful closing, "but for the story that Chef Vance tells on every plate. It is a story of where she came from, what she has endured, and the magnificent places she is about to go. It is, in short, a triumph." The whispers started soon after. The Michelin Guide's anonymous inspectors were notoriously discreet, but the industry had its signals. A lone diner asking unusually technical questions about sourcing. A couple who ordered the most complex dishes on the menu and barely spoke a word. After one particularly tense Saturday night service, where a diner at table 9 had scrutinized every element of the plate with unnerving focus, Nora and her team felt a collective certainty they were in the running. The night of the Michelin Guide ceremony felt like the final scene of a movie. Held in a glittering ballroom, it was the epicenter of the culinary world. Nora walked in, not as an attachment to a billionaire, but as a creator in her own right. She found her table a small island of support in a sea of celebrity chefs, Antoine looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable in a tuxedo, Jane giving her a reassuring nod, and her core kitchen team, their faces shining with nervous hope. Then she saw him. Richard was across the room holding court at a prime table near the stage. He was flanked by Senator Davies and a smug-looking Victoria Carrington. He was working the room, shaking hands, projecting that familiar, unassailable confidence. He caught Nora's eye. There was no flicker of doubt in his gaze, only a cold, dismissive contempt. It was a look that said, "You can play in your little sandbox, but this world still belongs to me." Nora met his gaze, held it, and gave him nothing back. The battle was over. This was simply the announcement of the victor. The ceremony began. As the host started announcing the new one-star recipients, a hush fell over Nora's table. Name after name was called, with each one that wasn't Nonna. Her heart sank a little, while the knot of anxiety in her stomach tightened. She gripped her sous chef's hand under the table. "And for a new entry," the announcer's voice boomed, cutting through the tension. "A restaurant that has captured the heart and palate of the city with its profound and personal cooking. From a chef whose journey has been as remarkable as her food, receiving its first Michelin Star, Nonna." For a heartbeat, there was silence at her table. The collective shock of a dream realized. Then chaos. Her team erupted screams of joy and tearful hugs. Antoine Dubois, the man who believed tears ruined cutting boards, had a suspicious moisture in his eyes. He grabbed Nora by the shoulders, his grip like iron. "You did it, chef," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "The blade is sharp." As Nora made her way to the stage, the room a blur of applause and flashing lights, the spotlight found her. She felt the weight of her entire journey, the humiliation at that dinner party, the burning onions, the lonely subway rides, the terror of the legal battles, all coalescing into this one brilliant moment of vindication. She accepted the heavy, iconic red plaque. She stepped up to the microphone, took a deep breath, and looked out at the sea of faces. And she gave a speech that was not about revenge, but about gratitude. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and strong. "This star, this isn't just for me. It's for a grandmother in San Francisco who taught me that food is the voice of the heart. It's for a formidable mentor who taught me that discipline is its language. And it is for the incredible family standing in my kitchen right now who helped me sing that song every single night. This is for all of us." As she spoke, the broadcast cameras, masters of drama, did exactly what she knew they would. They split the screen. On one side, Nora, radiant and victorious. On the other, the face of Richard Sterling. The confident facade had crumbled. The public humiliation was absolute and exquisitely symmetrical. His smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. He glanced at Senator Davies, then at Victoria Carrington, seeking an ally, a shared eye-roll anything. But he found none. Their faces reflected only the room's new reality. They were looking at him, but they were watching her. He was no longer the sun around which they all orbited. He was a footnote in the story of her spectacular rise. The cameraman lingered, capturing the precise moment his arrogance curdled into pathetic irrelevance. Returning to her table was a victory parade. Chefs she had admired for years came to shake her hand. But the real celebration was later back at Nonna. The staff had champagne waiting, and the party was loud, joyous, and real. Miles away in the glacial silence of his penthouse, Richard Sterling sat alone in the dark. The city lights, once a symbol of his kingdom, now seemed cold and indifferent. He scrolled through his phone, the headlines a blistering testament to his failure. From mocked wife to Michelin Star, Chef Vance's triumph. Sterling's ex-wife wins culinary world's top honor. Revenge is a dish served with 1 star. Nora, meanwhile, stood in the center of her bustling kitchen, a glass of champagne in one hand. She was home. She hadn't just won a Michelin Star or a divorce settlement. She had won her name, her soul, and her future. The next morning, she would be the first one in long before the sun came up. She would place the red plaque on a shelf tie on her apron and begin the day's prep. Because the star wasn't the end. It was simply confirmation that she was on the right path, a path she had paved herself not with gold, but with fire. Nora's journey from a silenced spouse in a gilded cage to a celebrated Michelin-starred chef is a powerful testament to the fire that can be forged in the face of humiliation. She didn't just get even, she got better. She took the very thing used to belittle her and turned it into her source of power, proving that true worth is never defined by others, but is built with your own 2 hands, one perfectly crafted plate at a time. Her story reminds us that our passions are not frivolous hobbies. They are the very essence of who we are, and fighting for them is the greatest victory of all. If Nora's story of triumph and transformation inspired you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story of incredible real-life drama and ultimate revenge. What did you think of Richard's public downfall? Let us know in the comments below.